Therapists that have cried in a session. Why? My therapist cried while meditating a discussion between my mom and I. I have a neurodegenerative disease and she is my full-time caregiver. Because of my severe disability, she also has legal guardianship of me. Even though I am in my 20s, this is all fine with me. I need the help and I agreed in court to all of it. This was the first true disagreement that we ever had. And I'm ready to go. I'm in pain, unable to do anything for myself, and it's only getting worse. I asked my mom to sign a DNR because I had been resuscitated before. It was a mess and I don't want it to happen again. She refused. She doesn't want to lose her child and wants to do everything medically possible to keep me alive. The session was essentially me begging her to let me go while she sobbed and said she could never sign a paper that would lead to my passing. It was a terrible situation. No one was the bad guy. No one was trying to hurt the other. It was someone wanting their suffering to end versus a mother not wanting to lose her child. My therapist agreed that I should be allowed to make this choice, but certainly didn't think my mom was being manipulative or evil, just already grieving and trying to hold on to me as long as possible. I saw her wipe her eyes several times, and they were red by the time we were done. She actually hugged us both at the end. The situation wasn't resolved during the session, but my mom came around shortly after. She wouldn't sign the DNR but gave me legal permission to do so. So, in her mind, it wasn't her making the final decision. By the way, my mom and I have a great relationship. This was just one issue that we couldn't come to an agreement on. But it worked out now, and I'm in a palliative care and have a great team looking after me, including my mom. Now, who knew a DNR could be the hottest new form of mother-child bonding? Talk about keeping things interesting. Story 2. I was doing a cognitive assessment for a girl, so we were doing tests, and at one point she started crying. She was unable to tell me why. She was fine just one moment before. I let her collect her thoughts, then she said softly, "I don't want to be more stupid than my friends." She wasn't actually. She was very bright, but she didn't know that she has dyslexia, dysorthography, and dyscalculia. I realized that she went through 13 years of school without help. Her parents didn't want to do an assessment as they thought she was just lazy. I told her that she was very brave to decide to get help and things would get better after our assessment, and I felt tears in my eyes. First of all, I have great empathy for parents. For most of all, it is just a matter of ignorance, fear, and parenting is hard. If you're a parent and you see your kid struggling, please listen to professionals. We are here to help, not judge, and we will find ways to help you and your kid. Disorders, well, they don't go away. Don't underestimate it. The sooner you get help, the better the outcome can be. It's okay to be scared, but we're here for you and we understand you. Second, I'm really sorry to hear and read so many heartbreaking stories about people that weren't believed and struggled being undiagnosed. I wish you all the best. I hope you are in a better situation and you got or you'll get all the help you deserve because you do deserve it. Third, if you think something's wrong with me, get help if you are in a position to do so. Worst case, you understand yourself better and have a chance to make peace with parts of yourself. Story 3. At the time, I worked with young adolescents and this story has and always will stick with me. One day, I had a few scheduled sessions that would be done on college grounds. So I get through the day and prepare to leave. It's around 5 p.m. and as I'm walking in my car, I noticed a student just sitting at the bus stop. I walk by and say something like, "Bus running a bit late, huh?" And she replies with, I don't know. As I take a moment, I noticed a few flags. I say good day and introduce myself, show her my faculty pass, and ask if I can take a seat. For like 5 minutes, we're just sitting there, silent. Then bam, I remember I had a little pack of Skittles and a Milky Way, best chocolate bar out there, in my bag, and I whip those bad boys out and ask her which ones are better, Milky Shake or Skittles. She says Skittles, and I pass them to her while asking her how her weeks have been, and she just starts to let it all out. It's around 6-ish now, and I think that we should contact a family or friend to come and pick her up. We sit and wait with her while we continue talking. As her ride arrives, I ask her if she would ever like to talk again, and to my joy, she does. I give her the appropriate contacts and say goodbye. I get to my car, and I just have a good cry, lol. I'll leave it at that since there's more, but that was the first time. From where I've left off, it's been 2 months and we've had a session once a week and far out, man. The amount of sadness coming from this small thing. I was still quite fresh in the field, so I myself was still trying not to take things personal, but this one was heavy. Dealing with miscarriage, a sister passing, mother leaving, and her boyfriend too. Throw in all the pressure of end of your year exams, and it's enough for anyone to explode. It's the end of November, and at the end of our session, I walk her out and go back to my office, and there's a thick envelope on my coffee table. I open it up, and in the first paragraph, I know it's a termination note. I hesitated for a moment, but I noticed the letter was really crinkled and compared to the envelope, and as I read on, she's written the date at the end. I was able to backtrack my visiting dates to the college and found out it had been written within those few days I had met her. Behind that letter, a freshly written one was left without going into further detail. It was just her mentioning a few things, expressing her appreciation with a Skittles smiley face, saying, "Skittles are still better." After that, we had a few more sessions, but eventually parted ways by December as she felt like she could move on with her life. It was a lovely sight seeing the burdens that weigh us down slide off of people's shoulders. I still kept in touch with her for a while, and even with her father, even to this day. Sadly, she passed away in 2018. And who knew that a pack of Skittles and a Milky Way would be the ultimate therapy session kind of icebreaker? Story 4. Not a therapist, but as a client who had a therapist cry in session. I was talking about self-worth and how my loved ones talked to me for my entire life, including early childhood. Talked about specific things that I won't get into, but including being called stupid and idiot almost constantly, being treated like a failure and weak because of my very severe, very undiagnosed mood mental health issues, trauma. I experienced years long-term CSA, feeling like I would never amount to anything because no matter what, I got negative feedback and criticism anytime I did anything, and tried to share something I was proud of. She waited for me to finish because she knew how I would finish. But I know I'm an adult and it shouldn't get to me and it's not a big deal. No, I want you to look at me right now. And I did, and she had fury and tears in her eyes. And I started to apologize for making her feel that way, and she cut me off again and said, "No, I want you to see this. I am angry for you, so angry that no one has told you this is wrong or stopped it. I am angry because no one protected you when you needed it most and still failed you in the most basic ways. I need you to see that this is something people should be angry about." It hit me really hard and stuck with me. I think of it when I question my worth or try to downplay something serious that's happened or is happening to me. Thank you for being raw with me, Dee Dee. It changed me. Story 5. I made my therapist cry once and only once. We'd been working together for 4 years. She learned about the substances and weapon misuse during my upbringing, the many friends who ended to weapon misuse, my absent parents, the dad who was heavy-handed when he was around, the struggles in school and traumatic brain injury but never once shed a tear. She helped me sort out my depression, anxiety, and to think more confidently. She was wonderful. And with her hard work and my new psychiatrist, we cut out the depression and anxiety meds and switched to Adderall. We learned I have ADHD my entire life and my upbringing made it hard to diagnose. A lot of the symptoms overlap with ADHD and childhood trauma for those who grew up in rough neighborhoods like myself. She cried when I told her that Adderall changed my life. She was sad it took 4 years to figure it out and apologized for not seeing it sooner, but I wouldn't change it. She helped me realize my life was not the norm and I didn't need to continue to suffer from my past experiences. She is still helping me to this day, and I'm a lot better because of everything she did, not just the ADHD diagnosis. Story 6. I see a therapist individually and my partner and I see her together. She's an absolutely beautiful woman. I'm so happy she's part of my life. She's helping me work through some very deeply ingrained trauma and all of the issues that come with that. I'm chronically ill and my partner and I were discussing with her things that had gotten harder to do and how they were affecting me. I had tried crying about not being able to shower properly and that I needed help now. My partner reached over and grabbed my hand and said, "Even if you weren't sick, I'd wash you. I'll wash your hair, I'll wash your feet, I'll go help you to the bathroom whenever you need it. You don't have to do anything alone. I'll help you." I was crying, and when I looked at my therapist, she was crying too. She said, "That's so beautiful," and wiped her tears away. She's helped us through a lot of really hard things, almost leaving each other because of how my trauma manifests in the relationship. She's seen my health deteriorate and helped us grow closer. She's heard a lot of messed up things from me about my childhood. I think my partner's genuine expression of love was just a thing that touched her and is the sort of thing that is why she does the job that she does. Story 7. Does it count if you made your therapist cry? I didn't actually make her cry. She had been my therapist for over 10 years. I went to see her maybe every 6 months for the last several years. At the time I began seeing her, I was married, 3 kids, financially extremely well off after dragging myself up through poverty, the birth of my daughter, 6 months later through a horrific divorce, a couple years later meeting a wonderful man whom I married and had a son with. 11 months after we married, he was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer. Our baby boy was only 3 months old. For those keeping count, I now have 5 children. When our son was 2.5, he was diagnosed with autism. Husband could no longer work. My ex-husband owed me $30,000 back in child support and stopped making court-ordered mortgage payments, so the house went into foreclosure. Meanwhile, through no fault of his own, my husband's personality changed radically, and despite my best efforts, his anger issues made it impossible to live with him. But with 5 kids and no income, we both were pretty much stuck living in the same house until the bank took the house back, auctioned it off. Thank God no one bought it and wanted to move in. Then it took 2 years for them to finish the eviction process. Meanwhile, there was no heat, no running water, the electricity kept getting shut off, and I had to wash dishes with water I collected from rain gutters. The weekend we were to get out of the house, my husband moved all his stuff out and told me he would be living with someone else. We eventually got along well enough to be good co-parents to our son and became friends again. I eventually helped care for him the last several months of his life and was there when he took his last breath. When I got to the end of my story in our last session, she cried and hugged me. Story 8. Not a therapist, but I practiced as an RN in child psych, and we were required to sit on therapy sessions. Too many terrible stories to recall, but one stuck out to me. Young girl, she was 15, was raised in a hyper-Christian household. At the age of 12, she came out to her parents. Her parents were absolutely furious. They tried so many horrible ways to cure her. To name a few of the treatments that were carried out by her whole family, even her siblings, as well as members of the church. They would frequently tie her hands together in the prayer position to remind her of her faith during these treatments. They would place her in a small chest and lock it at night to prevent her from acting on her sinful tendencies. This continued in various forms of treatment all the way up to her 15th birthday when her dad decided, wait, I know why she doesn't like men. It's because she's never tried it before. So, you guessed it, she finally arrived at our facility because she had discussed termination ideas with a friend. We got CPS involved, and turns out they had already had an investigation against them, and CPS didn't do a thing. She finished out her Baker Act, 72-hour psych hold, and was unfortunately released back into the care of her horrible family. She committed termination 2 weeks after leaving our facility. Story 9. I'm not a therapist, but I used to volunteer to teach writing classes to kids in juvenile. They got a limited amount of paper to use each week for letters, journaling, etc., and the kids who chose to take the class did so during their otherwise free period and using said paper. Now, the point of the class was really writing through trauma as a means of taking over your own story and owning it, because that's something no one can take from you. A lot of these stories broke my heart, and it was emotionally difficult work, but there's one that stuck out and that still haunts me. The particular exercise was to write about your dream house and what you would fill it with. There was a young girl who basically just described a normal middle-class home, nothing fancy, just a safe place. Her mother had started selling her. She had never been to school. She had begun using substances, and she was HIV positive and had a termination. She described this quiet little house in the woods somewhere that would be hers, and what still comes back to me over a decade later was the last sentence. I will be there with a dog and a kitten, and I will be wearing a white dress. Story 10. I made my own therapist cry a couple of months ago. I told her how grateful I was to the person I used to be. That mess of a person who couldn't go to the grocery store without having an anxiety attack, who struggled to form lasting friendships with people, who lashed out constantly at the smallest provocation, who had no drive or thoughts of their future, who thought they'd have ended themselves by 23. I told her sincerely how much I love and value that person because even though they were holding on for dear life every day and barely scraping by, they survived. They made it so that I could take the steps to get better. They gave me time to decide to go to therapy. They saved my life. I would not be who I am now without that version of myself, and I will always have nothing but gratitude for them. I'm making myself tear up thinking about it, and you can imagine my therapist was a mess. We actually finished therapy a couple of weeks ago after 15 months and one day, and I have never felt healthier or more well-adjusted. I owe so much to her for encouraging and guiding me even at my lowest moments, and to myself for doing the work. Story 11. It's my mom's birthday today. That's how he started the first time he spoke after sitting quietly for 5 sessions. He told me his story of how he was mistreated by his father. He told all this without any emotions, not a tear. I sat in shock as CPS had not shared any information except that he was a troubled teen. He then said, "Yesterday's mistreatment is tomorrow's mistreatment. They have no today because they don't exist. How can they?" He then burst into tears and screams, but he immediately covered his mouth with both of his hands, and I could see white marks around his fingers as he suppressed his own voice. I only saw his eyes filled with unbearable anguish, pain, and fear. And for the first time, I forgot I was a therapist and became only a mother. Before I could reach out to hug him, he ran out of the office. I cried a lot after that session for days and heard his muffled screams many sleepless nights. It had such a profound impact on me that it changed the way I saw my two sons and all the other men in my life. It was also the last time I saw him. He never returned for his next session, and CPS would not share any information. I tried to find him but never did. I asked a friend to draw me a painting of a boy pressing his mouth with his two small hands. That was 10 years ago. The picture still sits on my desk. I went on to do my PhD on the topic of treatment paths for male victims, fear of becoming mistreating, and male stereotypes. I now teach, and I start the first class of every semester with that picture and his quote. I still try to look for him on the streets and in the supermarkets. I hope you are okay, and I hope you are happy. I know you exist, and I think about you a lot. Story 12. I counseled Navy recruits who were being separated in basic training. Day in and day out, I listened to men pour their hearts out. I was only 22 at the time. During my last month at Great Lakes, I spoke to an 18-year-old kid who told me his great-grandfather was a seaman, his grandfather, his dad, and two older brothers. This kid hadn't called home to tell anyone. He didn't know what to tell them. I mean, how do you have that conversation over the phone? I gave him my personal number and asked him to call me when he got home. 2 weeks later, I received a call at 2 a.m. He's already in absolute hysterical, and I can't understand him. After a couple of minutes, he calmed down, and the first clear sentence I heard was, "My dad could not have been happier. My brothers couldn't care less." I guess his dad had a massive change of heart when he left the military. I ugly cried from happiness and relief. I haven't heard from him since. I kinda wish he'd call one day, LOL. And if you're enjoying the video and getting entertained by some of these stories, please don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 13. If I feel it and it's a healthy, normal response to a completely messed up story, I show it. If I feel it and it's because I have some unresolved issue inside of me, then I try not to. Sometimes clients have never had someone outside of themselves reflect to them that what they endured was wrong. Despite being in therapy and knowing it's the issue they need to work on, they will often protect themselves from the full force of their emotional response by trying to normalize it all. You did not deserve that. And you do deserve a regular human response to something so horrible. For me, if it's a therapeutic response, I usually tear up, but it's not like I sob uncontrollably. The only time I can recall that I sobbed uncontrollably is when, after working with a client for months and months on her substance issues and deep guilt around how she parted with her child 20-some years prior, she'd been making progress. Then, sudden silence. I was unable to get a hold of her despite attempting to call. I was working for a public mental health agency at the time, so outreach was required, and it was very difficult to discharge a client without their permission. After following all the prescribed rules for outreach, one night I was just reviewing her chart. I didn't really want to discharge her, but we were at that point when I noticed a document in her chart I had never seen before. I opened it, and it was a coroner report. They had found her body on the street. I cried a lot over that. Story 14. Not a therapist, but I work for a first responder training program that focuses on duty-related and personal stress and PTSD. The first activity of the 3-day training is to get people to share their stories. I never cry outright out of respect. Many participants have negatively described their therapists, usually through an EAP, crying. 3 stories stick out that really disturb me. Big, burly cop is retelling going to a house where a boy is being mistreated. The mom is yelling at the kid to eat his cereal properly in front of the officer. Kid can't really use his arm. The officer retelling the story is sobbing. It reminds him of his own mom growing up. Cop tells a story about running into a house fire and pulling out 3 children. They were all sleeping on a couch with mother's boyfriend when the fire started. Boyfriend ran out and saved himself. He started the fire by falling asleep with a cigarette. The 3 children were making absolutely no noise, no crying. The boyfriend observed this and said, "Good, at least they didn't wake up." He thought they were still sleeping. They all passed away shortly after. A traffic cop arrives at a massive house fire. There's a girl trying to kick out a window on the side of the house. They manage to get her out and see that her hands and feet are bound. She tries to scream and talk but can't. They find the sister and old brother ended inside. The mother is also harmed and bound but survived because she was able to roll into the swimming pool from the second story. Their house was for sale and a man came to look at the house. He was in the process of mistreating the mother when the school bus dropped off the 3 kids. Every story I hear hurts me, but it's the ones involving kids that hurt the most. Story 15. I cried several times actually. Sometimes I felt I shouldn't. It doesn't seem professional, it's quite a dilemma. But well, I work with children and teenagers back in the days, pediatrics, neurological diseases, rare diseases, etc. I love those little buggers. Seeing them achieve their goals and their family's goals, bursting with happiness. A kid that was finally able to run with her peers in PE class. A disabled teenager that worked herself to be able to get into college. The parents happy because their kid was smiling and being a brat. Yeah, most people wouldn't like a brat, but a brat may be someone else's dream. It's a kid that is actually living life instead of just being there struggling. A disabled teenager that wanted to be able to ride public transportation on his own. Parents thanking the therapist. I couldn't stop the tears. I was just so happy for them. Not everything is rosy though. I still remember the day a grandma asked me when her grandson would be able to walk again. He had muscular dystrophy. It's a progressive disease. He used to be able to walk and was now using a walker. It was a matter of time until he had to get a wheelchair. And we can't do miracles, unfortunately. I was so young back then. I wasn't able to answer the grandma. By coincidence, a colleague took over at that moment since he was going to another therapy session with her. I didn't know what to tell that lady. Sorry, but your grandchild will never be able to walk again since his disease is progressive. It really broke my heart just thinking about it, and I had to leave for a few minutes to cry. I also remember a few things, parents crying by saying their children had passed for this reason or another. And what do you say to a grieving parent? I cried. I hugged them and I cried. Another angel in heaven is always a terribly sad moment. All I wished for my kids was to see them healthy and thriving. Story 16. I'm not a therapist, but I have been in therapy for the last 6 years. I've switched therapists a few times due to moving around a lot. The most memorable time was my intake session with my latest therapist about a year and a half ago. It was during COVID and finding a therapist during 2020 was hard. I suffered from really bad anxiety and depression from a pretty gnarly childhood. I finally had my first session via Zoom and my partner brought my laptop to me as I was sitting in the closet. When we connected, she asked me a little about myself and what I was dealing with and later noticed I was sitting in a smaller room. When I told her that my world had been shrinking uncontrollably since leaving my job and starting school as a full-time student during that time, forcing me to feel as though the new city, the apartment building, and finally my own 2-bedroom apartment felt too big, and I hadn't left my closet for about a week, I could see her eyes watering, and it all hit me at once. The wall of emotional detachment and numbness I had built towards my own life, and everything in it came crumbling down and I went from stone-cold patient relaying the same sob story I'd told time and time again to complete breakdown mode regarding how far I felt like I had fallen. We cried together and a year later I felt like for the first time I've truly healed in more ways than I could have imagined. I told her things I've never told a therapist before. I was ready to make that change, to grow, to tackle things stored away in the locked-up closet in the back of my brain. We shifted towards a PTSD clinic approach, utilizing revisitation of memories, I forgot the clinical name, and I haven't ever felt this good before. It was hard and I felt so much discomfort and emotional pain, but it worked. Invasive memories and intrusive thoughts don't cripple me like they used to. So if you're struggling, always seek help and comfort. I know I turned this into a soapbox about my experience, but if I can help one person to make the change they need to start living, I know it'll have been worth it. Story 17. Never in a session, but there have been some that have been upsetting and caused me to tear up after. I work primarily with kids and teens. There's the obvious situations where I learn about horrible stuff going on or that they've experienced in the past. But honestly, those situations don't make me cry because I'm so set on ensuring the kid is safe. Some recent ones that have upset me involve the parents. When you work with kids in a therapeutic setting, you often work with the parents as well. For young kids especially, because little kids aren't going to respond as well to talk therapy and have making changes in their lives, the best way to do that is to talk to the parents about changes they can make to better support their child. Many parents are well aware they need to make changes and fully accept my recommendations. I'm also very upfront about this approach when meeting with families for the first time. However, I have dealt with parents who, even after I prepared them for this and they expressed agreement, they still don't want to be told they are doing anything wrong, or at least that's how they interpret it. I'm very cautious in how I talk about this stuff with parents, but sometimes it doesn't matter and the parents still get offended. I've had situations like that where the parent says hurtful things to me and accuses me of caring more about money than their child. Honestly, I don't make a lot. Just because insurance bills for $180 or whatever doesn't mean that goes straight to my pocket. It's quite upsetting when I care so deeply for kids and only want what's best for them that I've lost sleep thinking about ways to help my clients. I often spend my own money to buy stuff to help my clients only to be told that I'm selfish and don't really care because I dared to challenge the parent. Story 18. When that session happened, my father had recently passed away. The same applied to my therapist, whose father passed just about 6 weeks before mine. I knew because she canceled an appointment, which rarely happens at the time, and she stated the reason. When my grief was fresh, I had asked her about her dad and how she's doing as well, and she answered and told me about her dad and had to cry. It might have been inappropriate by me to ask, and it might have been unprofessional by her, but to me, this moment was special. I have felt a connection to her in a special way because we went through the same thing at the same time. I've never told anyone about this because people might consider this as unprofessional or something, and I don't want people to think of that about her. She is a great therapist, the first one that actually got through to me. And one aspect that really helps is her being human, and in my opinion, she balances that line between unprofessionally oversharing and being a flawless robot, which was my impression of other therapists I had before, usually pretty well. I kindly ask you not to tear this apart because this is very vulnerable stuff. I wanted to answer, and like I said, I don't share this with my people. Story 19. Not a therapist, but spent 10 plus years as an overnight camp counselor where I got the opportunity to work with kids with terminal illnesses, kids who have lost loved ones, kids from mistreating backgrounds, etc. So I've definitely heard some devastating true stories. One week, my brother and I were placed to work with children who had lost siblings. There was a set of siblings who had gone to check on their less than a year-old baby sister in her crib. They were the ones who found her. This pair of siblings gravitated towards my brother and I since we were the only pair of siblings on staff that week. Last night, they told my brother and I about the moment they found her. We held them as they cried themselves to sleep. Later that night, my brother and I took a walk to the river to have some alone time from the rest of the staff who were around the fire. We cried and hugged each other in silence. I still get chills thinking about the entire situation. Absolutely heartbreaking. Story 20. To show empathy and within proportion to the revelation. To say, show my empathy for the man divulging his ongoing mistreatments by a family member to a person for the first time, and having a tear or two come to my eyes, he cries while he relives it in the moment he chooses to tell a person, me, for the first time ever. For example, all therapists have the choice to show emotion or not, therapeutically helpful emotion, something that serves the session and the treatment, something proportionate, authentic, and nothing that is over and above or even comes close to what the client's emotion is about it. For example, if they shed a tear, you show a sympathetic face. If they don't cry, you lend a hand for support. If they bawl and you're genuinely moved, you may have your eyes glass over and need to dab them a bit with a tissue. If the client is the type that needs an emotional or responsively emotional therapist. Some clients want humanity and empathy in their therapists, and they need to feel heard and also felt. Conversely, some clients need therapeutic strength and immobility, the illusion that we are not quite human and can't be hurt, because some clients feel they must caretaker for us or our emotions if they think we can be hurt by their revelations of the difficulties and traumas of their past. To their mind, they think we might be shocked or appalled or reject them even, or that we're too weak to handle it, or that they could break us since their experiences damage them, so why not us? When this isn't actually the case with good therapists, it's sometimes the client view that it is possible to break or scare off or hurt your therapist. But no one should be a therapist in an ongoing relationship with a client who can't handle their authentic sharing no matter how difficult the situations they've endured are. Everyone needs something different, but everyone needs authenticity and proportionate reaction and unconditional positive regard and care. Short answer, and I have not slept, but maybe it got some of the point across. Some schools teach that it's inappropriate. It can be. It has to be at times well chosen for therapeutic value and be authentic. If it doesn't help the client or the relationship, then it's pointless and self-serving. But other schools of thought teach that it strengthens the bond and increases your humanity and trust and shows your honest empathy. Basically, if a story truly moves you and it is socially and therapeutically appropriate time to shed a tear or two in solace and solidarity with your client, that's okay. Just don't bawl endlessly to a sad trauma story that your client isn't moved by. And also don't bawl louder than a client. Remain in control. It's a means of showing your heart for relationship and therapeutic gain, which helps the client, if done right, and if done with a client who needs this type of therapist. It's rare, but sometimes it's a huge thing for a client, and shedding a tear or two in silence with them as they cry heartily is a great way to connect, to show you care authentically and honestly, to make them feel like someone cares they suffered, because I do. It helps make it easier to share their pain the next time and the next until it becomes easy and something they don't have to carry, something that's no longer heavy to carry each day. Story 21. At my old job, we were lucky to have an office counselor or therapist. I have to say a really good one who really managed to help us with a lot of the work stress and interpersonal issues. Several employees went to the owner praising them to have done so. In the end, the therapist left because she decided to move to Europe. It was one of the biggest losses the office had ever suffered, and several employees left after that because the therapist was never replaced. The story is me, one day, going into her office. She was in tears. I asked her what's up, and she opened up about one of our coworkers having lost his wife a while back. Before she passed away, she recorded messages to her daughter, and it was so crushing to see that 4-year-old talking about how much she misses her mom. I cried a bit too. And that night, I had trouble going to sleep. I got up from our bed, went to the balcony and smoked. I then stayed in my daughter's room and just listened to her breathing. It was one of the deepest moments for me as a dad, listening to her peaceful breathing. I had to undergo massive surgery last summer, and before I went under, I thought about that moment and regretted that I hadn't recorded something, just in case. I'm happy to still be around. Story 22. I never outright sobbed with a client before, but I've definitely teared up, just yesterday in fact. It's almost always a sympathetic reaction to seeing a client cry. Now mind you, I have clients cry all the time in session and it doesn't bother me, but when someone is just sitting in real abject pain, usually due to finally accepting something they were trying to avoid, that can get me. Honestly, I think it's important and I don't try to hide it. I think it demonstrates empathy and alliance and demonstrates I actually care about them, which I'll try to show to all my clients, but "you're paid to say this stuff" is a very common refrain. It hits differently when they see it, I think. If I were going to cry at a client's story, trauma history, etc., though, that I think I'd try to suppress, in that case, I want to show via actions that no matter what they're bringing in, it's okay and we can talk about it. I do a lot of trauma work with children, and the first step is showing them it's safe to be dysregulated or have emotion in the room and that you won't be dysregulated in response, which is what most adults will do around them. Story 23. Not a therapist, but I was a crisis counselor that would take calls that the therapist couldn't handle. They would often call me in to deal with issues or past liability. I'd go out to horrific scenes, deal with people who are crazy, determine if, say, a schizophrenic could be left alone or needed to be admitted into a psych unit, etc. In short, I've seen almost all the bad things you could imagine. The one that got to me was I got a call for a man who was crazy and met him at some cheap motel he was staying at. And his story just left me at a loss. He had AIDS, life in shambles, other chronic issues. Made a lot of bad choices, but a lot of bad luck just hit him even harder. And it went on for hours, and he really wanted to try and turn his life around, like he really wanted to try. And sadly, that's rare in these cases. I didn't cry, but after everything, I gave him $30 out of my own pocket, told him to treat himself for food and admit himself into the unit the next morning, and he did. But that was the first and only time I actually gave my own money to someone. That and anything with kids usually got to me, not crying, but close. Story 24. Not a therapist, however, I work with patients in an inpatient unit in a mental health hospital. I speak to them very frequently and hold one-to-one sessions. So there was this lovely, very talented lady who suffered from bipolar disorder. She had a severe psychotic episode where she had burnt her own home down. She graffitied all over her neighbor's house and was arrested for GBH. Comes to us. Her psychotic episode mainly consisted of false allegations and heightened delusions towards the environment she was in, resulting in refusal of treatment. After her psychotic episode and extensive treatment, she now had capacity and was going about like me and you. She then dipped into the most depressing episode I've ever experienced. She came to remember what happened when she was in a psychotic episode. This was breaking for her. She cried most of the time, stopped attending to her personal care, and would continually ask if her dog was still alive. She was deeply sad and that she had potentially ended her dog and would profusely explain that she did not mean to do this. She was also banned from returning to her area and had no money or career to start her career elsewhere. I would most of the time leave these conversations deeply hurt for her. On a good note, she did very well after discharge. She found a job in home decorating and managed to build up a lot of money to put down a mortgage. She even came to decorate our ward and made some beautiful quotes and paintings on the walls. She gave us homemade mugs each, and I hope she continues to do well. Story 25. I made a therapist cry once. I had a very rocky relationship with my mom. We never really got along after I was like 10 and going through puberty, and I really closed her off. We just didn't know how to deal with each other's reactions. She would tell me off and I would close off because I learned early on that it was never a fight I could win, but she interpreted it as I didn't care. I was just protecting myself, or I thought so. The more she would tell me off, the more I would close off, and the more she would piss me off to get a reaction from me. I think you get the vicious cycle. She interpreted me not reacting as me not caring, but it was mostly to not show that it really hurt, and I thought her seeing how much she hurt me would give her satisfaction because she wanted just that. She had cancer when I was 14. She was 44. I remember we had a fight, and then at dinner she told me. I was like, okay, you'll beat it and it's going to be all okay. I truly didn't believe that my mom could pass away this young. So I went to walk the dog afterwards and bawled my eyes out, but never in front of her. I had to move out for the last 4 months because she didn't want me to see the end. I was there when she passed, but I took it the wrong way. I thought that she didn't want me when she would need me the most because she couldn't have the energy to deal with me. And I went home for Christmas. She was so skinny and had so little hair. Her body couldn't process water or food anymore. I knew I couldn't talk to her in person, so I wrote her a letter with everything on my heart. She took the last piece of energy to get to her chair and reply to me. We then talked in person, and it was the first heart-to-heart conversation we ever had. She soon had trouble breathing, kind of like a really bad asthma attack. I went to get my dad, and I couldn't bear to go back in. A few moments later, she was in a coma and passed away the following day. Despite our rocky relationship, we still managed to make amends at the end. And if you like these stories and any one of them got to you, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video, and thanks for hanging with me on this one.